din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. самых окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Страна моя родная, я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой навечно человек. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой навечно человек. За столом никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, отдых и на труд. Страна моя родная, весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Я
оклад. И нас не согреет треск речей под барабанный раскат. Марш левый, 2, 3, марш левый, 2, 3, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы извинить, и что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш левый, 2, 3, марш левый, 2, 3, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш левый, 2, 3, марш левый, 2, 3, встать ряды, товарищ нам. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. In der Arbeiter Einheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий.
Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И он продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь.
Не
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. It is the evening of the 28th of June, 2025, and we come to you with a special interview with Comrade Bahman Azad tonight, which he'll be joining us in just a moment. But wanted just to jump in first to set the stage, so to speak. Obviously, our discussion is going to be focused on the recent U.S.-led regime change operation against Iran, and the wider implications of this, both for Iran and for all those who are trying to break with U.S. imperialism or break the power of U.S. imperialism. So that's going to be the substance of our discussion with Comrade Bahman Azad in just a moment. Before then, I'm just going to greet those of you who are in the chat. If you'll just bear with me a moment. So we have Slumbering Colossus, we have Working Prole Incorporated, we have Nikki Const, we have Luke Miller Howes, we have John Crowfeather, we have Robeson from Indonesia, and we have David Ball, Caustic Grip, and we have Malin Ridlov, we have Evgeny Nikolaev, Robert Svolenich, Stephen Sant Amam, James Graham, Samuel Edgar. We also have Dinner with Franklin, Comrade Jerry Nehat, who says, terribly sorry to our guest because of my lumpen nation. If you think yours is bad, try walking around this one. Devolcious G from Canada, Will Johnson, Dingo Ate Me Baby, Jenny, good evening to you, and Walter Stolzring, good afternoon. So, interesting discussion to come. Be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. And we'll be getting ready for our discussion with Comrade Azad in just a moment. And so just a couple of other things before we start. Hope you all enjoyed the most recent Decline and Fall episode. More on all of those subjects to follow in the coming week, but we're going to be turning back to a focus on battlefield developments in the Ukraine war. That's going to be coming up in the next episode of Decline and Fall. So be sure to keep an eye out for that one. And also be sure to keep an eye out for our various specials that we've got coming up. So we're trying to put together something on the EU, which we hope to get the very interesting writer and analyst Thomas Farsi to come on the show for, and a special edition of the program looking at the internal, shall we say, subversive activities of the British security state against various different oppositional forces within Britain over the last 15, 20 years or so. So, going to be looking obviously at their activities against the Scottish independence movement. It's clear that there's been a lot of involvement of them in that. Going to be looking at, going to be doing something on their activities in the occupied 6 counties of Ireland as well. So, that's going to be coming up quite soon, and also their ongoing campaign against the trade union movement, etc. So, going to be doing that. So be sure to ready yourselves for that. So, I'm just going to be adding that to the schedule. So, just going to bring Bahman Azad on now, and hopefully he can hear me. Hello there, Bahman. Can you hear me?
Hello, comrade. Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. I can't see your your visual. It seems that your camera's off.
My camera is on. I don't know why you don't see me. Is there
Let me just
anything
have a
I
look. Yeah, it says your camera's off on this end.
Hold on a second. Let me see. Okay.
There we go. Perfect. Got you there. So, Bahman, welcome back to the stream of the Marx Engels Lenin Institute, and thank you for joining this one, because it's a very important moment to have someone like yourself on to be able to give what I view is the more thorough understanding of and comprehensive understanding of the situation with regard to Iran, both internally and, of course, facing the various different assaults that US imperialism and the other imperialist powers are coordinating against Iran via their regional colonial state known as Israel. So, Bahman, I'll just introduce you to the audience. For those of you who aren't familiar with Bahman's work, he is the president of the US Peace Council, and he's also the author of, let me just get it, this book, which is Heroic Bitter Defeat. It's an analysis of the books on the subject that I'd recommend that comrades who want to get a good Marxist analysis of the situation look at that for a good indication as to like the struggles that went on in there and the real reasons for the fall of the USSR. I'd recommend that, as along with several other books that looks at it properly. So, Bahman, welcome back to the program. And if I may begin by asking you perhaps what might seem an obvious question, but I'd like to get your take on this, which was this latest assault on Iran by the US and Israel, was this, in your view, a case of a very obvious regime change operation that they tried to badly disguise with the talk about Iran's nuclear program?
First, thank you, Comrade Alexander, for inviting me again. I'm happy to be here and talking to you and your listeners. Comrade Alexander, I think we both know, and very well, that this is not a new subject. They have been using the excuse of the nuclear project in Iran, nuclear technology in Iran, as an excuse to cover what has been their consistent objective of regime change in Iran for a long time. And, the question of Iran as a thorn on the side of US imperialism started with the revolution itself in 1979. And they are dealing with Iran on several levels I would like to emphasize. One is they cannot tolerate any independent state anywhere. So that revolution was the beginning of independent role of Iran in the Middle East, which was really threatening to the interests of United States imperialism and Israel as its military base in the region. Secondly, the question was the power struggle within the region between Israel and and Iran, which has been always since the beginning of the revolution. That has been the case, that Israel has always been determined to, one way or another, crush Iran with the help of the United States. And thirdly, and I think this is a more recent development historically, which is the transition of the whole world into a new world order, multipolar order, in which Iran plays a critical role. And in that sense, a third layer was added to it, that the elimination of Iran from the scene became most urgent, because in my view, of course, some of the comrades say we have passed this stage, but my feeling was that the US was feeling that the whole transition is getting to a point of no return, and they had to do something quickly. Of course, in my discussions with some of the comrades, even in Venezuela and other places, They were saying that we have even passed that point of no return, but still, I think that U.S. Relying on its military power could create obstacles left and right. But the question is, the U.S. has come to realize that this process cannot be stopped except by military means. And to stop it, and recognizing that with the whole resistance to U.S. domination and monopoly hegemony in the world was challenged first by Russia in Ukraine, and then by October 7 uprising in Palestine, they realized that if they lose the Middle East, West Asia, the whole battle is going to be lost for them, because that is a critical area. So they went full force with all their means. First, the brutal attack on Gaza and the killing of hundreds of thousands of people, tons of thousands of people, and then going after Lebanon and then Syria. And now this is a phase that could save them from total collapse. And I think Israel was almost losing the battle before even the attack. And they knew it, that if Israel loses this, US will lose the whole thing. And that is why they went full force and started this nonsense and criminal act. The point is that U.S. And I wouldn't call it even U.S.-Israel attack. It was a total NATO attack. It doesn't matter where the missiles are fired from or the bombers start from. The question is, that is a whole NATO project. And we saw it in this campaign, that all NATO forces were mobilized in favor of Israel, into support of Israel, and that was the case.
Yes, it's clear. It's clear to anybody who analyzes even just the British press that this was treated as a priority because British Air Force jets were diverted to the Middle East to try and shoot down Iranian missiles that were fired at Israel. You had all of the European Union major countries declaring full support for Israel. You had all of the NATO countries, bar none. Maybe Spain sort of disagreed, but they mostly declared support for Israel, and several of them lent military assets to this as well. So this confirms really the usages of the Zionist project by first British, US, and now US imperialism as, well, what Theodor Herzl himself sold it as, which is it's a beachhead of the West in the Middle East, which is designed to suppress and repress any move towards sovereignty and independence and unity that is taken in the region. And it's clear that that's the role that Israel's still playing. But I wanted to just go back and just pause on the question of the fake negotiations that the US indulged in before this attack, because not only is it the case that Trump himself is a proven liar, not just as a president, but as a failed businessman, and not even a particularly good liar, but also the Iranian leadership will know very well that the Americans led the Russians on a merry dance for years over NATO expansion, promising negotiations, but ultimately never actually negotiating. And so I wanted to ask you, did the Iranian leadership really believe that these negotiations would lead to something? And is it the case now that following this war that the US and Israel waged on Iran, that are there any prospect of returning to those farcical negotiations is now dead?
Well, first of all, regarding negotiations, you're absolutely right. I mean, they have proven over time again that these are all ploys to just distract people from their main objectives and their plans. So it was clear. And when you talk about the negotiations to begin with, I'm sure you know that Ayatollah Khamenei opposed these negotiations and called it, various characteristics of being not wise, not being, responsible, not being this and that. But the thing is, when we talk about the Iranian leadership, we have to understand that there are various tendencies within the Iranian leadership, and they have their own relative influences on the outcome. And it has been a battle back and forth, I think, between various factions. Not various, but the two sides in terms of pro-West and pro-East generally, faction within Iran, to how to in terms of how to deal with the threats and the United States plans, imperialist plans. And usually the argument on one side is total submission and let it go, and the other side is resistance. And especially since the collapse of Syria, the question had become, more threatening, the situation. Of course, their voices were stronger in terms of let's not fight with the United States or let's not resist the United States. And this showed into itself in a back and forth in Iranian approach to the whole process. As you see, Iran was not consistent about that either. At some point they would withdraw. But from the beginning, it was very clear to all of us that given what the US is demanding and what Iran is standing firm on, there was no way these negotiations could succeed. US wanted an all-out disarming of Iran. It wasn't just nuclear. And everybody knows that the problem of the United States imperialism with Iran, the whole imperialist camp with Iran, is not just nuclear. They know Iran did not have any nuclear project to weaponize nuclear energy. And there was a fatwa against it also. And for the past 20, 30 years, Iran had never done that, and it was under supervision of IAEA. And everybody knew that was not the issue. The issue was a cover, an excuse. If you look at the first JPOA agreement and Trump's withdrawal from it, if you remember, the foreign minister, the Secretary of State of the United States, came out during Trump with 12-point demand in addition to nuclear, that we should withdraw support from Palestine, withdraw support from Syria, shut down your missile project, shut down this, shut down that, stop resistance. So that was the agenda for the US from the beginning. It was a continuation of Trump's first round. And that was the demand. And of course, Iran was not ready to submit to any of that. And it was clear that this is going to fail. Those of us who are familiar, I'm sure, including you, were expecting this to happen sooner or later. The timing was not clear, but the fact that it was going to happen if Iran refused to accept U.S. demand for total disarmament, this would happen. And it happened. And they really... No, I think it was a blessing in a sense that it put an end to the argument by pro-West forces inside Iran that the US has good intentions, Israel wants to have peace, and all of those things are gone out the window. And now Iranian government, in a more consolidated way, is more determined to resist this whole process.
Well, that was going to be my next question to you anyway, Bahman, which is there seems to have been inside Iran a very large-scale consolidation of opinion of the masses behind the leadership, and specifically behind the leadership of Ayatollah Khamenei, who was the Zionist Israeli Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, confirmed yesterday in an interview to Israeli television that they did try to kill Ayatollah Khamenei, but they couldn't find him. So I suspected that would be the case. So the rallying of the population behind him and the seeming sidelining of Pezeshkian seems to bode well for future the resistance of Iran against U.S. imperialism, because the pro-Western side has had the political ground completely cut away from it by the actions of the U.S. imperialists themselves. So the next question really is, well, where does Iran go from here? Because it seems that this exposed not only the pro-Western side, but it exposed some problems internally inside Iran, which is that, first of all, the either Mossad or CIA or MI6 or all of the above were quite successful at recruiting and running networks of agents inside Iran. It seems that a lot of the damage that was done initially wasn't actually done by the Israeli Air Force, but by saboteurs on the ground, which puts a different spin on the initial attack. And so it's clear that there is a problem facing the Iranian leadership of security and handling these internal networks of agents now. So how do you see things going forward now that there's this ceasefire? How do you think the Iranian leadership is going to respond to the problems that have been revealed by the US-Israeli attack?
Well, that's correct, because if you remember the first day or so, all the attacks are the images and pictures that we saw where certain floor of a certain building hit while the one above it and below it were not damaged. It means it was clearly a drone attack from inside. It was not Israeli attack. I mean, direct Israeli attack. So it is clear, and that made it clear that the casualties during the first 24 hours were all a result of domestic actions and not from outside. Initiated from outside, but initiated from inside, but through Israeli agents, Mossad and others. So that showed a real security hole in the defenses of Iran, and fortunately they managed to recover quickly. But the threat is still there, very seriously is there. Although security forces in Iran have managed to uproot some of these elements and arrest and even execute a couple of them, but the threat still exists. And it is my understanding that, first of all, this ceasefire is just a fake. It's not a ceasefire. It's just a break time for preparing for the next phase, in my view. And secondly, probably the main threat from now on is coming from inside. And the Iranian government and leadership should really focus on the dangers that are existing with threatening the whole leadership in Iran. And that's the main security concern that all of us have. And especially, the security of the leadership of the Islamic Republic, which is a key element because, as you said, the people of Iran showed that despite all their grudges against the economic conditions and the political conditions and all that, they were ready to defend the country and the nation, and they stood by it. And that frustrated one of the main objectives of the enemy, I think, that now they have to find some other way of trying to sabotage the Iranian government.
Well, my own analysis of the US's situation with regard to Iran is that the US itself is not capable at this moment in time of launching the kind of military operation by itself as a purely military operation that would be able to topple the Iranian government. They don't have the necessary manpower. They don't have the necessary amount of industrial production domestically to replace the amount of war material that would be lost in an attempt to invade Iran. Unlike Saddam Hussein, I doubt the Iranian leadership would let the US just land a whole army in Saudi Arabia and not fire at them, for instance, which is what happened back in 1991. So they would need to pursue other tactics, and it would seem that they have the MEK terrorist organization, which they have been garrisoning in Albania for many, many years. They have Balochi separatists at their disposal. They have, I think, certain Kurdish separatists as well. And they have other regime change type operations that exist within Iran. It would seem that their next move would be to try and instigate some kind of general revolt, possibly combined with terrorist activities, sabotage operations. And this is really their only option, considering pure air power campaigns don't work, and they can't invade. So the question of resolving or addressing the internal contradictions in Iran surely becomes more important to deny the enemy the political space it needs to regroup, basically.
That's absolutely correct. But my personal feeling is that even the idea of instigating a revolt has been frustrated at this stage. I would think more in terms of possibility of doing what they did to Syria in terms of causing ethnic frictions in different parts of the country, Balochistan, Kurdistan, and other places. Of course, with the position that Pakistan is taking, probably Balochistan is less likely, but from other areas, there is still able to cause trouble for Iran, probably dismembering the country. And we have to understand that during the first Iraq war on Iran, the objective at that time was to separate Khuzestan, the oil-producing province of Iran, and invade that and turn it over to Shah's generals, return them there, and establish a so-called independent state there with the oil, and then leave Iran to its misery in the north. So that could be a possibility also. We shouldn't forget that, because it's not just about crushing Iran, but if you put it in the context of global situation, that could damage the China's supply of oil also. That's one aspect that we have to be aware of, that I know about 80-90% of Iranian oil is going to China right now. So they could disrupt that process. That could also cause a lot of work.
Yes, I didn't realize that they planned to carve out a puppet state as part of the Iraqi war on Iran in the 1980s. That's a new one on me, but it does fit completely with the general tactics of imperialism, which is to fracture countries, particularly larger countries, into as many different micro states as possible, all of which can then be run by imperialism using a comprador clique, basically, which they stick in charge of it. And it's just worth reminding the audience who maybe aren't familiar with the Iran-Iraq war. This was an 8-year-long war, which led to a tremendous amount of death and destruction, and which US imperialism was the prime mover behind Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi Ba'athist government. Of course, they later disposed of him when they no longer had any use for him. But this was a serious and 8-year-long effort, with Iraq essentially being used in a similar role to that which Ukraine is being used now against Russia, and with a similar callous disregard for all life, be it Iraqi or Iranian, by the imperialists. So, Bahman, I don't know if you want to offer a brief comment there on the importance of that war in terms of the political development of Iran, and like how much the US and the British and others backed Saddam Hussein during that time.
Well, they even supplied him with chemical weapons. You remember there was the US companies that were providing him with chemical weapons that he used against Iranian forces. So the idea, as I said, was to put an end to the Iranian Revolution through that war. And it wasn't just the military effect of that thing, but it was the political effect of that thing, because that war was a means of shifting the political balance of forces inside the country in favor of the pro-West liberal forces, because all the revolutionaries were fighting on the fronts and Iranian economy was collapsing. And because of that, and the first phase, Iran had to rely on absolute imports for everything they needed, both militarily and economically for the survival of the country. And that created a huge powerful class of merchant capital that was in the process of importing everything that the country needed, and through that made billions and billions of dollars worth of profits that strengthened them inside the country to the point that they could not only grab some control of the whole economy, but also gain some political power through their political strength to infiltrate the Iranian parliament and take some positions of leadership. And they were the ones who facilitated the Rafsanjani's project for privatizations and the IMF process. So it was the turn in Iranian internal politics came as a result of that war. And that was the facilitator for the following events that led Iran into a pro-West, for a while, economic neoliberal economy that actually is still hurting Iran up to this point. So that was critical in the whole process.
Well, you've spoken about this before, the development of like a pro-Western oriented bourgeoisie and how this has led to a schizophrenic policy at times by the Iranian government. On the one hand, you have those who wish to resist the hegemony of the US over the region and to retain the path of sovereignty and independence that the 1979 revolution established. And on the other hand, you have a group who are tied by their class interests to relationships with capital from the imperialist countries, who would happily, I think, like grovel before the US and the British and the French and others in return for being able to access more capital from those nations, from the imperialists, and also to be able to gain access to markets over there and to trade more freely. And that contradiction, or perhaps antagonism, it seems it needs to be resolved, really, if Iran is to go forward. So I wanted to get your opinion on the prospects for this, which is that there clearly needs to be some kind of move forward in terms of restricting the ability of this part of the bourgeoisie to do damage. So I'm thinking, if we think of recent examples in the last year, like for instance, the Putin-led system in Russia had to, in its earliest phase, tell the most nakedly comprador elements in Russia, you can no longer dictate state policy. You are free to make money, but you're not free to impose yourself on the state. That's the deal. You can keep all the things you've stolen, but you are now outside of politics. And for many of them in Russia, that was too much, and they all fled to the West. I'm wondering if a similar thing could be achieved as a first stage in Iran to sort of at least push the comprador elements to one side. What's your opinion on the prospects of that?
This is something, you're right. This is something we have been calling for decades. No question about that. But the point is that, first of all, this mafia capital is so entrenched into every aspect of the system that it is hard to dislodge it unless with a determined force. And it seems to me, up until the time of this war, this attack on Iran, the left wing of the leadership of Iran was hesitant in terms of hitting it head on, But it seems now the gates are open for such a process. Again, it's going to have its own costs, especially since there is still a threat of external war going on. If you want to start a campaign internally, you have to be secure from outside before you can do that. So in a sense, I'm sure the intention is there, at least on the part of the revolutionary forces that I am familiar with. But at the same time, they are being cautious still until this particular phase that Iran is in right now is past. let us not forget that even those forces, as soon as Israel started the attack, joined the whole bandwagon and in defending the country, as even the opposition joined, let alone those people who are in power. They even, whether honestly or dishonestly, they are now joining the bandwagon of defending the country. And I don't think it is time at this stage right now to declare war on them internally until this threat from outside is passed. So I consider that the hand of the more revolutionary forces in Iran has been strengthened after this attack, and they have every reason to proceed with the process. But there are other external factors that they have to consider also at this stage before they move. But the calls for such kind of changes in the governance of the country is being heard from all corners in the country right now. Intellectuals, economists, political figures are talking about that, and it's coming from the actually revolutionary side much more strongly. But again, I assume that this external threat, unless it's kind of contained and controlled, that process will not go on full-fledged in a true sense that we need it. But the voices are being heard right now within Iran about that.
I would encourage the audience to read an article that's on your group's website, the Mehr Group's website, which is from March 29th of this year, which is entitled "The Left and Justice-Oriented Islamism: A Necessary Alliance for Iran's Future," which I think contains a number of interesting reflections, including the attitude of what I would call revolutionary religious nationalist figures, such as the late Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, who talked quite eloquently about the necessity of like an anti-imperialist, pro-independence, pro-sovereignty alliance between the left, be it communist or socialist, and these forces such as Hezbollah or the revolutionary religious elements inside Iran. Such an alliance was, according to my knowledge of it, there in the early phase of the Iranian Revolution. It's been there at different phases of the struggle in Lebanon and other places. But I think it is vital when faced with this external threat that these forces, as is said in the article, come together both to secure against the external threat and also to reinforce the path towards like BRICS integration, the path towards the integration with the East, and to consolidate all the forces in favor of that against any remaining pro-US forces in there. So I'd encourage the audience to read that article and also follow up on the comments made by Hassan Nasrallah about the possibilities of alliances there, because I think too many communists and socialists in the West have neglected that aspect of the necessity of that alliance in certain areas of the world. But did you have anything further to add on those points, Bahman?
No, but I think what you said I totally agree with. The question is, at this stage, I want to just raise one point, that we have to look at the reality of the situation also and see how much the Iranian revolutionary forces have free hand to operate in this situation globally, internationally. One thing that is my understanding, and you correct me please if I'm wrong, I think the process of transition to a multipolar world, what it requires before anything else is a peaceful transition. Any war can put an obstacle in the process. And for that reason, I'm sure that forces and Iran has been, as you know, consulting with China and Russia about this thing. And the fact that there is also a kind of a concern for maintenance of peace as a transitional process is in the minds of all of them. So the question is, how much can you retreat militarily at some point in order to guarantee the long-term project success. So in a sense, a lot of people go back and forth. Oh, Iranian foreign minister said that's kind of a collusion. This is submission. This is this and that. I wouldn't take these things in a literal way of okay, they retreated, they went back, they went forth. They're playing their games in terms of maintaining a balance between confrontation and a process of peaceful advance. And we have to kind of balance between the tactical necessities and the strategic necessities of the situation in order to be able to continue the process without giving too much, but at the same time, not necessarily being hard-headed that would sacrifice the whole project for short-term gains or short-term punches, you know. So I'm concerned about that also, that I wouldn't judge every step of everything that people are doing in terms of, oh, this was a retreat, this was an advance, but in terms of a more strategic approach to the whole thing, that to me, given the whole picture, not in terms of Israel-Iran or just the Middle East, but the whole picture, we have to think more strategically than just local battles.
Well, I think the imperialists themselves clearly are seeing a much greater game than just the case of like whether it's Israel versus Iran. To the whole, as we were talking about earlier, the reason for the attack on Iran is not just local; it is global, which is that Iran and its developing relationship with the Russian Federation, for instance, it's developing economic integration into the Eurasian Economic Union and with organizations such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and its role as a conduit for energy into China. All of this gives Iran and the question of the nature of the government of Iran a global spin. There is definitely and there's a reason why the US imperial planners since the early 90s have been plotting out their various different attempts at regime change in Iran because of the central importance of it. And so there is very much a global perspective to be viewed here. And also that the war that the imperialists wage on Iran is sometimes covert, sometimes relying on color revolution activity, assassinations, terrorism. Sometimes it bursts out into the open, as it has done recently. And maybe it'll go back to being covert again now for a little while, but they can't stop the war. It's just that sometimes it's open, sometimes it's veiled, hidden. But I wanted to get your perspective on just the 12 days of this sort of open war, because after the initial very heavy assault on the Iranian leadership, a lot of assassinations, as we already discussed, they did try to kill Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei and failed. But after that, it's clear that Iran, even without nuclear weapons, possesses the ability to seriously damage the Israeli regime now. I've been looking for like footage of the damage done by Iranian missiles, and now there's more and more coming out of the completely destroyed Israeli military buildings, very badly damaged key strategic sites in Israel. The Israeli regime tried very hard to stop this from coming out, but Israelis themselves film it on their phones and it goes up. So it's clear that Iran possesses major deterrence capabilities, and also that the ceasefire was asked for by the US side because it seemed to me that the Israeli regime was being pushed to the point where serious internal problems would start to develop. So it seems that, from my analysis of all of this, Bahman, that Iran came out, to use the boxing term, ahead on points in this war at the very least, and actually exposed a lot of extremely difficult problems that the Israeli regime will not be able to resolve in a hurry. But what's your interpretation of the war and why the ceasefire was called for by the US?
Well, I personally agree with you. I personally don't allow myself to be drawn into who won, who lost that argument here, because the war is on, it's continuing. And yes, in some rounds, one boxer punches more than the other one. But the whole question is we have to wait until the whole match is over. And we have to decide in terms of, if we get too much into this kind of argument or discussion of who won, who lost, I think we are missing the whole process that is going on right now. And the threat is there. Iran, yes, Iran put out a good fight and really wounded Israelis, very damaged Israelis very badly. No question about that. But Iran itself suffered a lot of damage also. And certain holes in Iranian defenses were also revealed that need to be covered. And so it is clear that US and Israel will be thinking twice if they want to act the same way again. There's no doubt about it. But as you said, now that the war, the battle, the fight is going to go underground and in a secret way. And we have to be more careful about that part of it right now. So we are hoping Iran showed that it's not going to be defeated by, even though it's under attack by the whole NATO forces. It's not easy to defeat Iran, and the people of Iran showed that they're standing by their government and their country. And the whole regime change issue is, I think, off the table. And if they think that by assassinating this leader or that leader, they can change the situation in Iran, they're absolutely mistaken. I think the leadership of Iran does not depend on one individual or two. And so the fight continues, the war continues in different ways maybe, but it will continue, and it will take some time before we know who's won, who's lost. But I am optimistic. I know that we are at a turning point in historical process, and history is on the side of resistance and transformation. And these are the last desperate attempts by the imperialist powers to retain or maintain their hegemony. But given the whole current of history, I think I would predict that the losers will be the imperialist powers and their lackeys.
Well, that is largely my view as well. I think that they have degenerated now to the point where they have hollowed out their own countries and are unable even to pursue the kind of wars that they did when they were rising imperial powers due to the massive internal contradictions facing them now. And it's to that that I want to turn to with our final question for you this evening, Bahman, which is the role of the anti-war and peace movement in the imperial core countries themselves. Because this is something which I think needs to be, we need more clarity on the way in which we oppose such wars. You will always get, in Britain anyway, a large number of people turning out, quite rightly, enraged about the sights and the horrors coming out of Palestine, coming out of Gaza. And you will get quite a number of people coming out to oppose a US-Israeli attack on Iran. We see this quite large-scale demonstrations about this. But I think that the perspective on those demonstrations, certainly from the organizers of them, is sometimes politically lacking. There is not a clear understanding of the necessity of taking an anti-imperialist perspective. There is a lot of pacifism, and there is a lot of, in Britain anyway, people can't condemn the US without then also saying, and we condemn the government of Iran for X, Y, and Z. So it seems to me we need the anti-war movement in the imperialist countries needs to have a much better understanding politically of where we are and how to conduct our campaigns. But I want your opinion on this as somebody who's obviously president of the US Peace Council, and your interpretation of this.
Definitely. U.S. Peace Council has always been pushing for a more anti-imperialist orientation to the peace movement in the country, in the U.S. As we are operating. But anti-imperialism is not just sloganeering. We have to understand how the system works. And how the system works, I think it should be understood as a systemic. Imperialism is a systemic phenomenon, and it's not just a political phenomenon or individual party phenomenon or anything like that. So, for example, the recent movement against Trump, while focusing on, okay, we demand economic reforms, we demand support for the working people, we demand this and that, at the same time calls for support for NATO. They don't see the linkage between the cause of people's sufferings inside the country and the militaristic policies and adventures abroad, in terms of waste of resources, in terms of the cost to human life, in terms of military budget doing all kinds of damages to the country. Certain sectors of the economy is growing like cancer, as opposed to the more civilian and social welfare, human welfare related industries. So all of those are a systemic phenomenon that you cannot attack one aspect of it while forgetting the other aspect of it. And you cannot win independently. You cannot win the battle for the environment without fighting the battle also for wars and invasions. So there were all those distractions. For example, there is a split between Israel and United States over Iran, or the Jewish lobby is controlling the U.S. government. All those kind of fake stories that kind of distracts the movement from the real root cause of the problem. And that is what we are insisting, that you have to look at imperialism as a system. It's not Trump, it's not Biden, it's not Democrat, it's not Republican. Fascism is not coming only from Republicans. We have to understand that. So you have to see the whole thing as one systemic, integrated systemic process. And if you don't look at it that way, you will lose the point and you will be barking at the wrong tree all the time. And that is the issue that we have to bring in and inject into the minds of the movement, that, in a way, I would say social democracy, any idea-driven, any peace project driven by social democracy ends up where it is now. And I think we have to go beyond that. That's my feeling.
Yes, and I think that there is a great problem in the imperialist countries with the absolute refusal to do I think what the Chinese would refer to as an all-around analysis, of imperialism, not just as a phenomenon attached to one political party or another, as you say, or just something which is a system from the past, which is now gone, but as a system which has its domestic and its foreign implications, and also its not only political implications domestically, but cultural implications as well. And there has been a resistance to that kind of thinking, certainly in Britain, I would say, since probably the later 1960s, with when the peace movement started just going in the direction of saying peace at any price, which of course was Gorbachev's rationale, where they and the late Soviet leadership in the 80s and very early 90s deliberately discounted any systemic analysis of imperialism and say, we will do whatever it takes just to have peace, which largely meant surrendering completely and collapsing the country. And so if you don't have that all-around analysis, you get misled. Like there was a big peace movement in the United States in the period of George W. Bush, and it allowed itself to be completely misled by the very vague and false promises of Barack Obama, because it was just focused on the evils of George W. Bush or Dick Cheney, not that as we were saying about the war in Iran, sometimes the war is open and naked and defined by like slogans of jingoism and chauvinism. And sometimes it's the war, the imperialist war is conducted under the banner of human rights, equality of all peoples, rights for small nations. But as
Women's
Putin
rights,
says,
women's
yeah,
rights.
women's rights, gay rights, every other form of rights that they can use to segment a particular nation. And also, and I'll just leave it on this: if the peace movement and anti-war movement does that have that kind of systemic analysis, I think the reason why a lot of its leaders don't want to have that is because it would mean rejecting, in the American terms, the duopoly of the two bourgeois parties. You couldn't have that analysis without saying that you can't say that there is an anti-war option on the Republican side, and there isn't one on the Democratic side either. So I think there's, in my country, there's too many invested in the Labour Party, and in America there is too many still invested in the Democratic Party. But I'll throw to yourself, Bahman, for final thoughts on that.
Oh, it's interesting. Absolutely correct. It's interesting that the main warmonger now is the Democratic Party. Interestingly, in a sense that they are the ones who are responsible for this whole neoliberal globalist project that is coming to an end, and it's bankrupt now. And the opposition by Trump is actually riding this objective protests, real protests of the people against this globalist project since the collapse of Soviet Union that was imposed on the world and on the people of the United States, and they are paying the price for it. But Trump is taking advantage of that anti-war, anti-imperialist sentiment generally that is developing, not necessarily theoretically conscious or ideologically conscious, but against the outcomes of an imperialist project. Writing that and presenting himself as a peace lover or peace opponent, and selling it to the public as if Republicans are now becoming forces of peace, and this whole gameplay that they do in front of the people. This is something we have to avoid and be able to kind of debunk and really go beyond that and see the root element that is driving US imperialism and deal with that rather than dealing with manifestations of it here and there. And that is the issue that we have to deal with really seriously. And we don't have much time because they can destroy all of us as the way they are going. I mean, it seems that US has no options left than instigate war one after the other to block the process, and that's the only thing that they have available to them. Otherwise, they cannot compete politically, diplomatically, economically. The only option for them is war and militarism, and we have to be careful about that, regardless of what sources comes from. We have to stop that.
I think that's an excellent point to draw our discussion for this evening to a close on. Bahman Azad, President of the US Peace Council, thank you for joining me this evening, comrade.
Thank you very much for inviting me, comrade. It was a pleasure to be here with you.
And as this situation regarding the what is clearly an ongoing US-led war on Iran continues, we will, of course, be asking you to come back on the show again at some point in the near future, I'm sure. And it would be always good to hear from you.
Thank you very much, comrade.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And we'll see you again next time.